She was nothing more than the housekeeper. Quiet, unnoticed, the kind of woman people looked right past. But when a billionaire set out to handpick the perfect stepmother for his heartbroken son, it wasn't one of the polished candidates who won the boy's trust. It was the maid. What began as whispered gossip behind the marble walls of a Palm Heights mansion soon exploded into a headline-making spectacle. A family torn apart by the choice between preserving a legacy and protecting love. Now, with the world watching and reputations hanging by a thread, one woman faces a choice: walk away or fight for the boy who calls her mom and the man who's just learning what love really means. And ask yourself, what would you do if a child's heart chose you over everyone else? Adrienne Whitmore had it all: money, power, a Palm Heights estate that looked more like a palace you'd find in Europe than a place to live. But even billions couldn't fix the one thing that truly mattered. His son, Lucas, was broken. For years had passed since Lucas's mother died suddenly, but for the 9-year-old, time had stood still. He'd pulled away from the world, choosing silence over conversation, shadows over sunlight. No nanny could coax a smile out of him. No therapist could break through. Not even the most prestigious boarding schools could reach him. And Adrienne? Well, Adrienne buried himself in work, expanding his empire in real estate, mining, and tech, telling himself it was all for Lucas. The truth? He was running from the grief, running from the guilt of not being there the night his wife took her last breath, running from the hardest truth of all, that the one thing his son needed most was the one thing money couldn't buy. Then, one day, Adrienne made a decision bold enough to set every country club from Miami to Barcelona buzzing. He called in an elite matchmaking agency. But here's the twist: it wasn't for him. It was for Lucas. Yes, you heard that right. Adrienne wanted them to find 7 perfect women, young, educated, beautiful, graceful. Women who could step into the role of Lucas's new mother. And, maybe, one day his wife. To Adrienne, it all seemed logical, efficient, strategic, fully under control. The candidates began arriving one after another. First came Aria Moretti, a platinum-haired Italian model who'd graced magazine covers from Rio de Janeiro to downtown Chicago. Then Clara Jennings, an heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune with an MBA from Stanford. And Lila Morgan, the influencer with 8 million followers and a camera-ready smile polished for perfection. Next came Maya Sullivan, a powerhouse corporate attorney whose cross-examinations could make Fortune 500 CEOs break a sweat. And then there was Elena Cruz, a rising television actress with the kind of face that made cameras fall in love and a portfolio of glowing press to match. Every woman in the lineup was flawless, stunning, sharp, and deliberately chosen to fit the Whitmore name like a tailored suit. They didn't just arrive, they made an entrance. Designer gowns flowing, heels tapping against imported Italian marble, perfume trailing behind them like handwritten invitations. They gathered in the grand parlor beneath glittering chandeliers, fresh orchids flown in from Bahamas, champagne chilling in gold-plated ice buckets. From the top of the sweeping staircase, Adrienne Whitmore watched them file in, adjusting his cufflinks. In his head, he rehearsed his words, phrases polished more like a corporate pitch than the warm welcome of a father. But Adrienne wasn't the only one observing. Just outside the parlor, in the quiet hallway, Grace Holloway was polishing the silver trays for lunch. She wore her usual gray uniform, hair pinned in a loose bun. No makeup, no perfume, just the faint, clean scent of lavender soap and a quiet strength she didn't even realize she carried. Grace had only been hired 9 months earlier as the housekeeper. But to Lucas, she was so much more. She sat with him while he did homework, listened when he talked about his mom, stayed beside him through the worst of his nightmares, made up ridiculous little songs to get him to brush his teeth. None of it was written into her job description. Nobody told her to do it. She simply cared. And Lucas? He lit up every time she walked into the room. Still, no one had ever asked Lucas what he wanted, until now. "Mr. Whitmore," said Tessa Vaughn, Adrienne's no-nonsense assistant, stepping into the study with a clipboard. "The candidates are ready. And your son is in the game room with Grace." Adrienne gave a single nod. "Tell him it's time." Grace heard the footsteps before she saw the shadow in the doorway. Tessa entered like a quiet storm. "Mr. Whitmore would like Lucas to join the selection," she said, her tone clipped. "He needs to be part of the decision." Grace's stomach tightened. On the floor, Lucas was bent over his Lego spaceship. He glanced up, eyes wide. "Am I really supposed to pick a new mom today?" Grace swallowed hard. "Your dad just wants what's best for you." But Lucas's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if I already found her?" Grace froze. Before she could speak, Tessa reappeared. "Lucas, now please." Grace squeezed his hand gently. "Just be yourself, okay?" Lucas gave a small nod and trailed behind Tessa out of the room. Downstairs, Adrienne began the formal introductions. One by one, The women stepped forward to greet Lucas, each carefully lowering themselves to his level, smiling warmly, offering gifts or painted promises. Arya leaned in first, telling him about summers in Europe and gelato in Lisbon. Clara promised to build a miniature amusement park right in the backyard. Lila flipped through photos of herself at celebrity parties, laughing alongside people Lucas had only seen on TV. Maya spoke of world-class schools and an education money couldn't rival. Elena shared her experience in Africa, filming a documentary about orphaned elephants. Through it all, Lucas barely spoke. His eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. Adrian caught the look. "Lucas," he said quietly. "Do you have any questions for them?" Lucas hesitated, then turned his gaze toward the kitchen door. "I want to wait for Grace." The room went still. Adrian's brow tightened. "Grace is working," he said firmly. And then, almost like on cue, Grace appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of fresh squeezed juice and warm cookies. She hadn't expected to be noticed. She definitely hadn't expected what happened next. Lucas's entire face lit up like sunrise. He ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. "You're here." The air shifted instantly. Arya's perfect smile slipped. Lila's eyebrow arched. Clara's knuckles tightened around her purse. Adrian stood frozen, caught between shock and silence. Then Lucas turned to the room, his voice loud and certain. "I already know who I want to be my mom. It's Grace." A ripple of gasps broke the silence. One of the women even laughed under her breath. Grace didn't move. Her cheeks burned red. "Lucas," she whispered, "that's not how this works." "Why not?" he asked, his small voice cutting through the tension as he faced the guests. "She's the one who reads to me. She knows how I like my sandwich cut. She sings to me when I'm scared." He glanced at his father. "That's what moms do, right?" Adrian cleared his throat, trying to pull the moment back under control. "Lucas, we've talked about this," Adrian said slowly. But the boy didn't flinch. "I don't want a stranger. I want Grace." Adrian's jaw tightened as a heavy silence settled over the room. 7 women, each carefully chosen, each perfectly polished to embody the future of the Whitmore legacy, now stood as nothing more than stunned onlookers. And in the middle of it all stood Grace, still wearing her modest gray uniform, holding a tray of passion fruit juice and warm cookies as if she'd walked straight into a trap. She hadn't been invited into this moment. She wasn't supposed to be here. "Lucas," Adrian began again, his voice low and deliberate. "These ladies came a long way to meet you. You need to give them a chance." But Lucas stayed rooted to her side, his small hands gripping the edge of her apron like it was the only thing keeping him safe in the middle of a storm. "I already have," he said without so much as a blink. "I want her." Grace's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She could feel the heat climbing to her cheeks, every eye in the room locked on her, as if she had orchestrated this entire scene. Her gaze met Adrian's. His face gave nothing away. Then she glanced at the women, Arya glaring through narrowed eyes, Clara shifting uncomfortably, Lila doing her best not to roll hers, Maya holding on to her composure like it was part of her job description, and Elena. Elena wasn't annoyed. She looked intrigued, maybe even a little amused. "I should go," Grace whispered, gently trying to pry Lucas's hands from her waist. "No," he said quickly, his voice cracking. "Please don't." Adrian exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Grace, take Lucas back upstairs. We'll talk later." But Lucas didn't move. Instead, he turned toward the room, his small voice suddenly steady and sure. "She's the only one who knows my favorite story. The only one who doesn't call me young man or pat my head like I'm a dog. She doesn't try to buy me or talk about my dad's money. She just listens." Lila stepped forward with a polished smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sweetheart, I'm sure Grace is wonderful. But don't you want someone who can give you the world?" "I don't want the world," Lucas said softly. "I want someone who'll sit with me when I'm scared of thunder." The words hung in the air, heavier this time. Grace's hands trembled. She hadn't asked for this. She didn't want to be standing in the center of this storm. She was a housekeeper, not a contender for wife or motherhood. But to Lucas, she was already all of it. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice unsteady as she tried to smooth the edges of the moment. "Lucas is just confused. He's been through a lot." "I'm not confused," Lucas cut in firmly. "You told me people who care about you don't leave. So don't leave." Adrian stepped forward, his voice carrying more bite now. "That's enough, Lucas. Upstairs. Now." But then, something shifted. Lucas looked up at his father and asked quietly, "If one of them becomes my mom, does that mean Grace has to leave?" Adrian paused. "Of course not. Grace works here." "No," Lucas shook his head. "That's not what I mean. Will she still help me with my homework? Still tuck me in? Still tell me stories and sit with me when I cry?" Adrian hesitated. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but to Lucas, it felt like betrayal. And he felt it deep. "Then I don't want any of them." Lucas said finally. I only want someone who already loves me. The line hit harder than anyone expected, even Adrian. Grace's eyes stung. She didn't dare look at the other women. She already knew. Lucas had just made them irrelevant. Adrian's gaze returned to Grace, really returned. Not as an employee, not as the quiet figure in the background, but as the person who had, without his even noticing, become the emotional anchor of his son's entire world. He'd spent months building this moment like a business deal, carefully crafted, perfectly staged, only to watch it come undone in minutes. Then Elena stepped forward, her voice calm but certain. Mr. Whitmore, may I speak freely? Adrian blinked. Go ahead. Sometimes, Elena said, kids see things clearer than we do. They know what love looks like, not because of grand gestures or expensive promises, but because they feel it in the small, quiet moments. The kind you can't fake. She turned to Grace. That's what he sees in her. Around the room, the other women began gathering their purses and coats. One by one, they made their polite exits, leaving behind the competition they could never win. Some of the women left gracefully. Others, not so much. Only Elena lingered. She crouched down in front of Lucas, her voice warm. You're a smart kid. Never forget, love isn't supposed to be complicated. Then she turned to Grace. Take care of him. He's already chosen you. With that, she left, and the grand parlor fell into an almost oppressive silence. Only Adrian, Grace, and Lucas remained. Finally, Adrian broke it. Lucas, go to your room. I need to speak with Grace. Lucas didn't argue. He just looked at her, eyes wide and pleading. Promise you won't leave. I promise, she whispered. When Lucas disappeared up the stairs, Adrian turned toward her. I didn't see this coming, he admitted. I didn't either, she said quietly, barely meeting his gaze. He needs you. I can't ignore that. Grace nodded slowly. But what do you want, Mr. Whitmore? That question seemed to hang in the air, heavier than anything else said that day. Adrian stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. I don't know yet, but I know that when my son looks at you, I see peace in his eyes. And I haven't seen that since the day his mother died. Grace's breath caught in her throat. Should love be chosen by comfort, by timing, or by something deeper, something you can't put into words? That night, long after Lucas had fallen asleep, Grace stood alone in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. The mansion was silent, the marble floors carrying only the faint hum of wind outside. But her thoughts refused to settle. The day had felt like a dream she hadn't asked for and couldn't wake up from. She hadn't expected Lucas's declaration, hadn't wanted the spotlight. Yet somehow, in the middle of that polished, carefully staged parlor, a child had pointed at her and called her love. Upstairs, Adrian sat alone in his study, fingers steepled, staring out over the dark hills beyond Palm Heights. For a man who had built an empire by always thinking 10 steps ahead, today had shaken him to his core. He had planned everything, down to the fabric on the chairs the women would sit in, the scent in the room, even the exact questions he'd ask. The one thing Adrian had never planned for, never even considered, was his son choosing the housekeeper. And the hardest part wasn't that it happened. It was that, deep down, Adrian knew. Lucas was right. The next morning, the air inside the mansion felt different, softer somehow, but edged with uncertainty. Adrian hadn't spoken to Grace since their brief exchange the night before. Lucas, however, carried on as if nothing had changed. He sat beside her at breakfast, telling her about a dream he'd had, asked if she could help him finish his puzzle that night. She nodded the way she always did, pretending she wasn't slowly unraveling inside. That afternoon, a knock sounded at Grace's door. She opened it slowly, drying her hands on a towel. May I? Adrian asked. She stepped aside. He entered, his eyes scanning the room. It was simple, almost bare. A twin bed, a small desk, 2 books stacked neatly on the nightstand. No decorations, no luxury, just quiet order. I've been thinking, he began. Grace stayed silent. I owe you an apology. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. For what? For never really seeing you, he said. You've been under this roof for months, raising my son better than I ever managed, giving him something I couldn't even name until he showed it to me. That's on me. Grace looked away. I didn't do it for recognition. I know you didn't. That's why it mattered. He paused, his voice softening. I've spent so long building walls around Lucas and around myself. I thought money could fill the cracks. I thought if I controlled every detail, we'd be safe. But I was wrong. Adrian hesitated, then met her eyes. And you weren't part of the plan. But maybe you're exactly what the plan was missing. Grace's eyes glistened, though she said nothing. Adrian drew a slow breath. I want to offer you something, but not out of pity or guilt or pressure. I want you to think about what you want, Adrian said, because Lucas has already made his choice. Now it's your turn. Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. What are you asking me? He took a step closer. Would you consider staying? Not just as the housekeeper, not as a stand-in, but as someone who belongs here, with us. Her heart thudded hard in her chest. I'm not asking you to marry me, he added quickly. Not today, not yet, but I'm asking if you'd be open to something real, something we build slowly. Honestly, for Lucas, and maybe for us, too. Grace's gaze held his, really seeing him this time. The man beneath the tailored suit, the grief hidden behind his success, the father who had almost lost his son's trust, but was brave enough to ask for help. You're right, she said softly. Lucas chose with his heart, but mine's still catching up. He nodded. I understand. Can we start small? She asked. Anything you need, he replied. Dinner, she said. Just the four of us. No staff, no wine cellar, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. Adrian's lips curved into a smile. Deal. That night, they cooked together. Lucas grated cheese while Grace stirred the soup. Adrian tried, and failed, not to burn the toast. They laughed. They talked. They sat around the kitchen table like an ordinary family. No chandeliers. No formalities. Just warmth. Over the next few weeks, the mansion began to feel different. Grace moved into the guest wing, not as staff, but as someone truly invited to stay. Lucas flourished. His smile came quicker, his laughter ran deeper, and he even began sleeping through the night again. Adrian changed, too. Fewer meetings, more breakfasts. Less control, more connection. They went to the park. Watched old Saturday morning cartoons. Even adopted a floppy-eared puppy named Peanut. Lucas swore it was the final proof they were a real family. And then, the letter arrived. It came from Adrian's mother, Margaret Whitmore. A legal notice. Short, cold, unmistakable in its intent. If Adrian intended to build a future with the help, she would cut all ties. No inheritance. No family seat on the board. No trust fund for Lucas. The Whitmore name, she wrote, deserves better. Adrian read the letter in silence, then crumpled it tightly in his fist. Grace saw the tension in his jaw. You don't have to choose, she whispered. I can leave, Grace said quietly. You don't have to lose everything for me. But Adrian stepped forward and took her hands. I already chose, he told her. The day Lucas said your name, the day you didn't run. I choose this. Us, even if the rest of the world doesn't understand. A week later, Adrian called a press conference. Reporters from across the country arrived, expecting a major corporate announcement. Instead, he began with this. I've made billions, but I almost lost the one thing money can't buy, my son's trust, his peace, and the woman who brought both back into our lives. This isn't a business decision. It's a family one. I'm not asking for approval. I'm asking for respect. Her name is Grace, and she saved us. The headlines went wild. From boardroom to bedtime stories. Billionaire finds love with former housekeeper. The internet exploded, half calling it a scandal, half calling it a fairy tale. But for Adrian, Grace, and Lucas, it was just real life. 9 months later, on a quiet spring afternoon, Grace walked into the backyard in a soft blue dress. Lucas stood at the altar, holding a small velvet pillow with 2 rings resting on top. Adrian waited, surrounded by their closest friends, his smile steady and full. I never thought I'd fall in love again, he said to the crowd. But she found her way into our lives through kindness, not grand gestures. She healed what I believed was broken forever. And today, I marry her with gratitude, with awe, and with every beat of my heart. Grace's vows were simple. I never planned for this. But you and Lucas, you became home. You gave me the one thing I never thought I'd have, a place to belong, and 2 people I love more than anything. They kissed as the crowd erupted in applause. Lucas threw handfuls of flower petals into the air like confetti. That night, curled up together in the den with Peanut snoring at their feet, Lucas broke the silence. You know what's funny, he said. You were never really the housekeeper. You were just waiting to be part of the family. So let me ask you, do you believe love can grow in the most unexpected places? Do you think a child's heart can see what adults are too afraid to? If this story touched you, drop the number 100 in the comments so we know you stayed until the end. And tell us what country you're watching from. And if you believe this story deserves to be shared, send it to someone who still believes in second chances.